Well, hello, beautiful people. Happy Sunday. It is so very good to be here with you on this Sunday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are, it is good. I would love for you all to join me in our centering prayer. And so I invite you to repeat these words after me. I welcome the Spirit of truth into my mind and let it grow in my heart. Thank you, God, in, through, and as me. Amen. Ashe. And so it is. And so it is. Beautiful. I see those yes, yeses. I see those hearts coming in. I see that I am available. I am available today and always. Yes, yes. Well, as a review, last week we looked at the ninth condition of a miracle, and that ninth condition is act as if. And so I spoke to you from the topic, faith doesn't or does not pretend, recognizing that acting as if is not about faking it until you make it. It's not about being fake or false, but there is a real action or activity that comes out of faith, that comes out of an absolute knowing, that comes out of a firm mind. A faithful mind, a firm mind is then a miracle mind. And I gave you that formula, the steps: think, visualize, feel, speak, write, and then we live, right? And so that's the acting as if. We actually do something out in our lives and out in our world, right? Again, it's not faking. In the same way that in this miracle story, Jesus breaks the bread. That wasn't pretend, that wasn't fake, it wasn't fake bread, right? So we're not being false, we're not pretending. Today we're talking about the 10th cycle. And Todd Michael in the 12 Conditions of a Miracle calls the 10th cycle, or condition rather, engaging the cycle. And so this is actually where the miracle happens. In the 12 Conditions of a Miracle, Todd Michael writes, as conditions 1 through 9 are established, energy flows towards the demonstrator, right? So this is actually a beautiful one sentence that kind of starts to bring things together, right? We've been going through the conditions. And so as you begin to establish conditions 1 through 9, as you begin to practice, integrate, and make that the daily practice of your lives, then energy begins to flow towards you, the demonstrator, towards you, the miracle worker. And so what is the flow of energy that we've seen in this miracle story of the fish and the loaves? Well, first, remember, Jesus practices the first condition of emptiness when he goes away to the deserted place, okay? And what happens? He attracts the crowd to him into that place. He does not turn the crowd away. What does he do? He begins to heal the sick. And so then that was a flow to and a flow out. And then what happens? There's a boy who has fish and loaves. He gives that fish and loaves to the disciples. There's a flow from the boy to the disciples. What do the disciples do? They bring the fish and loaves to Jesus. There's a flow from the disciples who received and now flowing it to Jesus. And then what does Jesus do? Jesus blesses and breaks the loaves and then gives them to the disciples. He receives, he flows that right back to him. And then what do the disciples do? The disciples give the loaves and fish to the crowds. And so in the 12 Conditions of a Miracle, Todd Michael writes this: in the 10th step or 10th condition, the demonstrator causes the incoming flow to circle back so that it travels out and away from them. That he returns the food to the disciples and the disciples give it back to the crowd. This sets up a circular current, a cycle. The manifestation process, while the manifestation process occurs while the energy is looping back. So this is why I said this is where the miracle happens. Right? Sometimes we're not aware of what's actually happening when the miracle, when the answered prayer shows up. But we build this flow. We tap into this circuit, this circular cycle, and that's when the process occurs. So some of you may be thinking, okay, PG, I get it. Giving and receiving, it's a cycle, it's a circle. You talk about it all the time, every Sunday, and we already talked about giving as one of the conditions of a miracle. Yes, yes, right? Isn't that one of the earlier conditions? It absolutely is. It's the fifth condition, giving. But to the extent that this 10th condition of engaging the cycle is pulled out as something different from Jesus showing compassion and healing the sick, that was where the principle of giving is demonstrated in that condition. This must be something more. This must be something else. And it absolutely is. So as we go further into this description, we read this from Todd Michael. When a circular current is established in conjunction with the other conditions of a miracle, I want to get that very clear, right? In conjunction with the conditions 1 through 9, right? This is important, right? That we're learning to live in and practice all of the conditions, right? And develop this as a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of seeing. So when you have developed this as a way of being and activated these conditions, then resources can actually multiply exponentially as they pass around the circuit. Seeds that are sown by a miracle worker can grow many times over to produce an enormous harvest. I put it this way, very simply, spirit always multiplies. Turn to your neighbor if you have a neighbor, or speak it out loud right here and now where you are. Spirit always multiplies. If it feels good to you and you want to remember it, put it down in your notes or type it right here and now in the comments. Spirit always multiplies. Just as we talked about in the very first sermon in this series, that spirit abhors a vacuum, just as you can be sure that spirit abhors a vacuum, when you live from and embody the conditions of a miracle, you can be sure that spirit always multiplies. Now, in the book, The 12 Conditions of a Miracle, Todd Michael in this chapter really writes about the what of this process. But I think you need to understand the how of this process. And in understanding how spirit multiplies, you will then begin to see your past miracles in a different light, and you will begin to engage and be able to engage the cycle, this circuit of manifestation to manifest new miracles easily, effortlessly, and elegantly, because spirit always multiplies. Now, the first thing that's important is that I'm using the word spirit, but spirit, of course, is just a name that points to something that really is beyond names. And so as we continue, I'm going to use spirit. I'm going to use consciousness. I might use source. I might use God, but they're one and the same. Spirit and consciousness are one and the same. And so you will definitely hear me use spirit and consciousness interchangeably. But I'm referring to the same thing. I can also call it God. I can also call it source. I can also call it the universe. And I want to say this about the universe. I love how Eric Butterworth names this in spiritual economics. Because, of course, we know people use the universe all the time. Oh, the universe this and the universe that, right? But I don't know that they really know what they're talking about. I think some people think that when they're referring to the universe, they're still referring to that which is physical, right? It may be beyond all that we can see, and so it feels wider and higher. But of course, there is a manifested universe. But that's not what we're talking about when we say the universe. If we think of it in the metaphysical sense, what we're talking about, as Eric Butterworth clearly highlights and defines it, it's the whole body of things. So everything, right? Not just what we can see, but that is that which we can't see, taste, or touch. So you can use any of those names. Again, I'm going to be using spirit and consciousness in this message. But what is the thing? What is this thing that we're talking about? This thing, spirit, this thing, consciousness, it is the ground of all being. It is the thing that is referred to as Atman in the Vedas. It is unmanifest reality. It is called nothingness or not a thingness because it is not physical or material, thus it is not visible, right? But yet, while it is not physical or material, based on our physical and material sense, it is infinite fullness. Why? Because every possibility exists within it. And this is why in the Kabbalion it is referred to as the all. It is allness. It is substance. It is life. It is intelligence. It is what I call the eternal omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence. And then that means that any attribute that we could ascribe to spirit, to consciousness, to God, to source, to the universe, it then is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. So then it's important for us to then understand the attributes of spirit and consciousness. First, consciousness or spirit is everywhere at all times. You heard me affirming in the prayer. PY pulled it back in the meditation, and I'm pulling it back again in the sermon. There is no spot where God is not, right? Now, that's a wonderful, beautiful, familiar New Thought axiom that we hear and say and affirm all the time. And unfortunately, when we get to the point where things are just said all the time and it sounds good and it feels good, we tend to not really remember or know what it means or contemplate what that actually means. There is no spot where God is not means that consciousness and spirit is everywhere at all times. It is instantly simultaneous, right? Something that's impossible for us as humans to express, right? So it's impossible for us to understand, right? Instantly simultaneous. And because it is everywhere at all times, the other piece I said already, it is infinite fullness because every possibility exists within it. So consciousness or spirit is every possibility. So if it is everywhere at all times, every possibility exists everywhere at all times. It exists. It's not manifest, right, on the physical plane, but in the unmanifest, the non-physical plane, every possibility is. And so something I want to give you is a universal denial. Emma Curtis Hopkins teaches that there are 5 universal denials, and I just want to give you one of them. And that is this: there is no absence of life, intelligence, or substance. Now, see, this denial, the reason why we can use this, and what are denials about? Oftentimes we need to use a denial before we can affirm something or before we can praise something, because we need to essentially reject what it is that our 5 senses are showing us, right? We need to refuse and let go of that thing. Essentially, even forgiveness work is a denial, right? We're releasing something and creating that space for a new thought and a new reality. So when we say there is no absence of life, intelligence, or substance, what we're then doing is denying any experience or expression that seems to suggest that life, intelligence, or substance is absent. But why can we say that? Why are we not telling a lie? Because we understand the nature of spirit and consciousness, that it is everywhere at all times, and it is every possibility, which means every possibility is everywhere at all times. This is why, as we talked about the principle of maximizing, we recognize this is why Jesus, as the demonstrator in this story, was not moved or vexed by what seemed to be not enough with the fish and the loaves. Although the disciples said, "We have nothing but," while the disciples were living in their onlyness consciousness, the miracle worker was not, because the miracle worker understood something to be true. That consciousness or spirit is everywhere at all times, that consciousness is every possibility. Therefore, every possibility is available everywhere at all times, because there is no absence of life, intelligence, or substance. Now, the other thing that's beautiful about consciousness, that's beautiful about spirit, is that it is self-interacting. If we look in the First Testament scripture, there's a name that's used for God that's familiar to, I'm sure, all of us: Yahweh. But what does that word actually mean? It means self-existing one, right? So I'm not referring to some new God, right? I'm not referring to something new. I'm just referring to the true understanding of it that has been misused, misplaced, misunderstood, sometimes disinformed, right? So that people don't understand the truth of their own power. Right? So Yahweh, God, source, spirit, consciousness, it is the self-existing one. It is self-interacting. All things come out of itself, right? And yet it never loses its own unity or union. consciousness spirit gives rise to the multiplicity of our world and affairs. Now, consciousness, while it gives rise to the multiplicity and diversity of our world and affairs, it is simultaneously aware of itself as one and many. If you look on the back of your money, you'll see that motto here in the US, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. But the Latin that spirit or consciousness would speak would be ex uno multi, out of one, many. Ex uno multi. And so as we understand these attributes about spirit and about consciousness, now we can talk about how spirit and consciousness manifests, and then understand how this powerful miracle could ever be possible, and of course, how it can be possible in, through, and as your lives. In his book, Consciousness is All There Is, Dr. Tony Nader says something very specific about consciousness. He writes that nothing but consciousness emerges from consciousness. Now, remember, I already said that it is self-interacting. It is the self-existing one, right? And we know that all things come from and manifest from spirit, manifest from consciousness. But did you know that nothing but consciousness emerges from consciousness? And this is the good news. I believe this is the good news of New Thought, amongst many other things, right? This is the good news of metaphysics. No, this ends the lie of separation, right? This ends the lie of unworthiness. This ends the lie of sinfulness. This ends the misuse of the Garden of Eden story. Nothing but consciousness emerges from consciousness. That means that nothing but spirit emerges from spirit. That which appears not to be spirit is simply a matter of perspective. If you change your perspective, you will see that God, spirit, consciousness is all there is and all there will ever be. Nothing but spirit emerges from spirit. Nothing but consciousness emerges from consciousness. And we are one with spirit. We are one with consciousness. This is why we affirm this in prayer, because it is so easy to forget this. It is so easy to be lulled back into sleep, thinking that we are something other than consciousness, thinking that your sister, that your brother, that any other being is something other than consciousness, thinking that nature, our earth, is something other than consciousness, thinking it is something to be manipulated rather than ourselves. Now, this might be a radical idea, right? As I said, nothing but spirit emerges from spirit. And I said that that which appears not to be spirit is a matter of perspective. Change one's perspective and one will see that God's spirit consciousness is all there is and all that will ever be. That may seem radical, but let's just look in our physical world and we can know this to be true, right? We know this to be true about DNA, right? Now, none of us at this manifest plane, at this physical level of being, can access or touch our DNA or look at it, but yet we know that humans have developed instruments that allow us to not only see and understand DNA, but to sequence it and understand all the wonderful things that we now know and are continuing to know about DNA. Now, on the surface, the diversity of human beings suggests that we are vastly different, right? We have, we present in so many different ways between height and weight and skin color, and our noses are different and our ears are different. And some of us need glasses, our eyes are different. Some of us don't. Some of us have hair. Some of us don't have hair, right? We could go on and just name all the different things, right? As we look across humanity, there's all of these different differences, right? But at the DNA level, depending on which study or method you cite, human beings are 99.95 to 99.99% alike at the DNA level. What does that mean? That means that all that we see on this visible level that is clearly different, right? Clearly diverse, right? Clearly. And that's beautiful. That's part of life, right? That's wonderful, right? That's an expression of the multiplicity that we're talking about. This spirit always multiplies. But all of those differences on the surface are just represented by a minuscule 1 or 0.05%. That's like mind-blowing if you sit with it for a second. And yet we know that that is true, right? We know that that is absolutely true. So again, that's about changing perspective. If I just use my physical eyes, that can't be true, right? But when I shift my perspective, when I shift my lens, it is obviously true, right? So it is the same, right? That which appears to be different is a matter of perspective. That which appears not to be spirit is a matter of perspective. Change one's perspective and one will see that God, spirit, consciousness is all there is and all there will ever be. Nothing emerges from consciousness but consciousness. Nothing emerges from spirit but spirit. So again, I want to remind you of that universal denial. There is no absence of life, intelligence, or substance. Because this is where this denial becomes very important with any miracle that we are seeking to express. Right? And miracle doesn't mean that it has to be fantastic, that it has to be some big thing like you're feeding thousands of people, right? It is simply that manifestation which is desired by you in any given moment. So now, if all is spirit and there is no absence of life, intelligence, or substance, if nothing emerges from spirit but spirit, then that would suggest to me that the bread being passed from the boy to the disciples, and then from the disciples to Jesus, and from Jesus back to the disciples, and from the disciples to the people, is not bread. Hold on, I'm going to give you a moment. I want you to take a breath on that. Because when you get this, you've gotten some power. If nothing emerges from spirit but spirit, and so all that emerges and manifests on this physical plane is a manifestation of spirit. That means that the bread that was passed from the boy to the disciples to Jesus, Jesus back to the disciples, and then to the crowd or to the people is not bread. Well, what is it? It's consciousness expressing as bread. Take a breath. Some of you already see it. Somebody wants to run around the room right now as they're starting to realize something about their own lives. Somebody wants to run around the room right now as you start to realize something about your own challenges and circumstances and opportunities. This means that the fish are not fish. It's consciousness expressing as fish. Your body is not your body. It is consciousness expressing as your body. Your business is not a business. It is consciousness expressing as your business. Your money is not money. It is consciousness expressing as money. What else did I share earlier about consciousness? I said it is everywhere at all times, and it is every possibility. Therefore, every possibility exists everywhere at all times in the unmanifest. See, in the unmanifest, at the level of consciousness, every soul in this miracle story already possessed more than enough food to eat and enough to spare. The miracle is not a creation or manifestation of something that did not exist. The miracle simply makes visible what was previously invisible or imperceptible to the human five-sense experience of the world. I want to say that again. I want you to get it. In the unmanifest, at the level of consciousness, every soul already possessed more than enough food to eat and enough to spare. Not in the physical. We're clear what the physical eyes showed. We're clear what the disciples said. The hour is getting late. Jesus, why don't we send these people away into the nearby town so they can go buy some food at Chick-fil-A or McDonald's? The miracle is not, or any miracle, it is not a creation or manifestation of something that does not exist. This is critical. The miracle makes visible what was previously invisible or imperceptible to the human five-sense experience of the world. Close your eyes and take this in. Everybody, please close your eyes and take this in. As a miracle worker, when you close your eyes to the eternal, right? We talked about that visualization. We talked about in the sermon, see something better. When you close your eyes to the eternal and see something better, visualize and imagine your good, your desired outcome you are seeing already is in consciousness. You could not see it if it did not exist in consciousness. It would be impossible. Every possibility exists in consciousness. Every possibility. You could not see it in your mind's eye. You could not envision it in the picture of your mind. You could not visualize or imagine it if it did not already exist in consciousness. You can open your eyes. So then Jesus, when we have that moment, that see something better moment, what Jesus did was he saw the people fed because that is a reality in consciousness. It wasn't even that he was being so deep or better than anybody else, right? He saw the people fed because that was true at the level of consciousness. And remember, in practicing that first condition of emptiness, that's where he was living, moving, and having his being. That's where he anchored himself. That's why we live, move, and have our being in that space, right? To tap into that transcendent space, which is the level of consciousness, and we bring that out and that awareness into the world, into our lives, so that then when we need to see something better, we can. See the reality that already is in consciousness. The key to your miracle is to know that it is impossible to imagine or visualize what does not already exist in consciousness. The conditions first change the consciousness of you, the miracle worker. And then the consciousness of a miracle worker is energetic, it's influential, it's inspirational. I love that word, inspire. It means God breathed. It comes from within. It's the opposite of motivational. The consciousness of a miracle worker is energetic, influential, and inspirational. And this influence also changes the consciousness of others. Sometimes that consciousness, that change is temporary. Other times it's permanent. But this is what we call, in the Kabbalion and the principle of vibration, it talks about this. This is what we call induction. And it is the process by which spiritual mind treatment works, affirmative prayer, as we teach here in New Thought. But it's important to understand that this is not manipulation or taking over somebody's mind. Because if you think about it for a second, we've all had the experience of being uplifted simply by being in someone's presence. We've all had the experience, and I know that as you come to CSC, just being connected to this live stream, right? There's an energy, there's an absolute knowing that PY and I polarize ourselves at, right? That uplifts your heart and mind, regardless of where you were or what you were feeling. Now, sometimes it's only for the hour and 30 minutes of this live stream, and you go back to whatever your vibration or mental state was, right? Other times you hold it, and through your own practice, you will continue to hold it, right? That's why we're always pointing you back to yourself. We also recognize that the reverse is true. We've all been in the presence of folks that as we get in their presence and their vibration does what? It influences us, and we don't feel good just being around them. Yes, yes? So this is not about manipulation, and that's why even the whole dialogue around energy vampires is misguided, right? Because it really doesn't have to be that someone is trying to manipulate you, right? But it could possibly be that you do not yet understand the power of vibration and that you can vibrate wherever you choose to vibrate and then not be influenced by the vibrations of anything or anyone else except that vibration is in alignment with love, in alignment with truth, in alignment with that which is beneficial, in alignment with that which is constructive, in alignment with good. So I want to come back to something that I just said earlier. The miracle simply makes visible what was previously invisible or imperceptible to the five sense experience of the world. In the well-known and often quoted verse on faith, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, that's Hebrews 1. The second part of that verse is not often quoted or even very well known, but it's something that I come back to often and often again because it directly applies to this understanding of consciousness. Hebrews 3, I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, says, "By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible." Now, first, when we read by the word of God, this is not the Bible, right? The writer of this text is not saying, by faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by what's written in the Bible. First of all, the world existed before there ever was a collection of texts called the Bible, so that wouldn't make sense, right? Let's just use our good sense, right? Let's use our good minds. But what is it talking about? Right? This verse is, of course, speaking to spirit or consciousness, as I have already discussed and described it. That thing which it says made from things that are not visible, right? Consciousness, spirit is that thing which is not visible. And then as the not visible becomes visible, this is what we talked about in the Blessing is Your Blessing sermon. Because I broke down this formula from Genesis 1, let there be, and it was so, and God saw it was good. That's the word of God that the writer is speaking to. And what did I say about that last part, and God saw it was good? It's not that God reflected and was like, look at me, I can create stuff. My stuff is bad. That's not what it was. God saw it was good. In other words, God called it good because I've created it and I've decided what it shall be. Right? Very important. That's why there's a blessing in your blessing, right? You must bless the thing that you see in your mind and you must call it good. So now here's the really, really deep, strap in, the really deep part about how the miracle unfolds and how a miracle like this could unfold and how a miracle like this does unfold. And many, many people have had what they would describe and I would describe as a fish and loaves moment. The miracle, and many miracles for that matter, appear to be instant. But is that possible? Is an instant miracle possible? Based on the reading of the story, the reading of the text, it was instant, right? Jesus blessed and broke the bread, passed it to the disciples, and the disciples began to hand it out to the people, right? So let's talk about something in terms of our physical universe, right? Our physical universe has fixed laws. We know about these fixed laws. Science, tells us about all these things. And of course, we spent some time in school and, learned about all those things. It's important. One of those fixed laws is related to speed. And this is going to help us to understand if an instant miracle is possible. Now, in our fixed physical universe, the speed of light is the limit. What is the speed of light? The speed of light is measured at 186,000 miles per second in a vacuum. And that's how scientists always describe it. Now, why is it in a vacuum? Because what that means is there's no interference, right? Light, the speed of light is different, a little slower if it has to go through things or go around things. That's going to slow it down a little bit. And we understand that, right? If you were to take that number and push it out to miles per hour, that would be over 11 million miles per hour, right? With no interference. Needless to say, the speed of light is really, 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 really fast. Right? It's so fast that we can't even perceive it, right, as human beings. And in comparison, to just understand how fast the speed of light is, the speed of sound travels without interference 761 miles per hour. Sound travels quickly, right? I mean, think about it. When we have a conversation, it's instant, right? What you hear from me, what I hear from you, right? It's like boom, boom, boom. We're in real time. But sound actually travels, right? From all of the things that create the sound and the air, the things and the vocal cords, for it to then come out, right? It travels. And so needless to say, this limit of our physical universe of the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second in a vacuum, or over 11 million miles per hour, is very, very fast. And so the speed of light, if that's the limit of our physical universe, this would mean then, Lord have mercy, this feels so good to me, that the fastest or quickest a miracle or manifestation could ever happen is at the speed of light. And what did I just say about the speed of light? We understand that light travels so fast, even sound travels so fast from our human perspective, that we can't see it travel, and it feels and appears to be instant. You see where I'm going with this? What appears to be instant is a matter of perspective. There are many things in our world that appear to happen instantly, but when we slow them down, or if we just contemplate it for a moment, we can identify that there was a beginning, middle, and end. It's one of the things that's so beautiful, that we can film things, right? And so you can film something and then slow it down, right? And you can see that, oh, wow, there what was a flash, or I didn't even see it. You slow it down and it's like, oh, wow, I see it enter the frame. I see it hit the middle of the frame, and I see it go out the frame. But when I speed it back up to regular speed, it's just a flash and I don't even know what it is, or I may not even see it pass at all. What appears to be instant always has a beginning, middle, and end, even if it is imperceptible to our human awareness. Knowing this, then we can let go of superstitious ideas about God's timing. Knowing this, we can let go of superstitious ideas about God delaying. Because if God is limited, if we want to even dare to speak in that way, God is limited, air quotes, by two things: the speed of light and interference. Now, I just said the speed of light is over 11 million miles per hour, something that is beyond instant to our human perception. So from our human perception, there is no limit, because God works and can work as fast as the speed of light. But what limits, or what stops an instant miracle or manifestation at the speed of light can only be interference. This effectively means that spirit, God, source, consciousness is unlimited in our time-space reality, to the extent that we take the limits off of God. God is only limited by the limits that I place on God. That's the interference. God is only limited by the limits that I placed on what's possible for me. That's interference. God is only limited by the limits that I place on what is possible for you. God is only limited by the limits I place on myself when I say I am sinless and unworthy. God is only limited by the limits that I place on myself when I say that I am full of guilt and full of shame. God is only limited by the limits that I place on the world when I say that something is wrong with this world, that this world is problematic, that this world is hell. God is only limited by the limits that I place on it. That is the interference. But in truth, God operates at a speed that is beyond instant when we think of how we perceive time and space. So if you want to understand how a miracle can be instant, how this is not just a fictional story that could never happen and doesn't happen. Again, I've lived fish and loaves experiences with food and with other things. What appears to be instant is never instant. It reminds me, I was thinking of this as well. I didn't put it in my notes. That notion of an overnight success. We all know that that's foolishness. We all know that that's not true. There's no such thing as an overnight success. And yet sometimes it feels that way, right? Like because of the limits of our perception, it seems like this person just popped on the scene and now they're like the most famous person on the planet. But there's no such thing as an overnight success. And so this miracle, which appeared to be instant, has a beginning, middle, and end. And I'm not just talking about the conditions. I'm saying in the passing out, there was a beginning, middle, and end that to the human perception was experienced as instant. It may have been at the speed of light or something below that, somewhere between the speed of sound and the speed of light. And so that's why it's experienced as instant. But there was a manifestation of it from the unmanifest into the manifest world. So are you starting to see how all the conditions work together to create a condition in your mind as a miracle worker, which then manifests as miracles and answered prayers? See, Spirit always multiplies. That's one of the beautiful things about how it works. When Spirit shows up, it manifests. I don't mean show up like we used to talk about in the old church, like God showing up. I'm saying when Spirit manifests, when consciousness manifests, it knows nothing other than multiplicity. That's the other reason why Jesus wasn't deterred by the thousands of people that may have been there, right? We don't know in that way because it's become a tall tale, thousands of people, men plus women and children. So it might have been 5,000, it might have been 6,000 people. Because Spirit always multiplies. This is how it works. It doesn't just manifest one planet. It doesn't just manifest one galaxy. It doesn't just manifest one human. It doesn't just manifest one type of flower. It multiplies always. And so I was reminded of a story, something that I experienced. This was during the first year of CSC. And we just spoke the name of this beautiful soul recently. PY and I, we were having a conversation about her. Back in 2013, we had a very interesting experience. One of our neighbors, our neighbor who lives across the hall from us, died by suicide. And it was very tragic. All of us who live on this floor were very troubled by that. And it kind of brought us all close together. And, we memorialized her together, and that was beautiful. But I remember after hearing the news of her transition and her death by suicide, I was at work that day, and I remember seeing on social media there was a young Black sister who was a content creator, an influencer, beauty influencer, was very popular. Had all of these followers and views and things. She died by suicide. And I was like, wow, this is just awful, to hear this news, somebody I know and then somebody I don't know, but seeing the impact she had and seeing how so many people were really dismayed and really sad at the news of her passing. And then my best friend sent me a text not long after that, telling me about one of her sorority sisters who died by suicide, and they'd just gotten the news and everyone was devastated. And it was just a terrible moment. And I found myself in that moment starting to go to that space that so many of us go to, like, oh no, what is happening? This doesn't make any sense. Why is there all this death? Why is there all of this suicide? And it shouldn't be this way. And I'm just feeling bad. I'm feeling terrible. And so I decided, I was like, you know what, let me leave the office. Let me take a walk. I'll walk to a place that I love to eat for lunch. And as I was in that moment of deciding to take a walk to shift, I was thinking about this reality of consciousness, right? This reality that every possibility exists everywhere at all times. And so while I am seeing and experiencing this existence of 3 deaths by suicide, I know that there is also life. And I began to say within myself, I need to see life. I need to see life. And I found myself, as I was saying, I need to see life, I began to speak it out from my mouth as I'm walking down the street and crossing Atlantic Avenue. I need to see life. I need to see life. And as I crossed Atlantic Avenue and was walking, I believe it was 6th Avenue, I was walking down, there was a woman behind me. I could hear her because she was on my phone, on her phone. Sorry, and that was whatever, right? That's normal. And I'm just continuing to walk, but I hear her, and something within me said, "Look back." And I was like, "Why am I going to look back? Like, she's going to think I'm some creepy dude, or like I'm not looking back at this woman." I kept walking, and again saying, "I need to see life. I need to see life." But something said, "Look back, look back." I turned around and looked at the woman, and I saw that she was pregnant. And I said, Spirit, I see you. Consciousness, I see you. I said, need to see life. And something within me said, look behind you. And there I saw life. I saw this woman carrying new life. And that began to shift me in a profound way. And I went on my way and walked up Flatbush Avenue. And as I got to the place where I wanted to eat, I opened the door, and what do I see standing there at the cash register? As the person paying for their food, it was another woman. She was pregnant. And then I laughed because I said, Spirit, I see you. I need to see life. Need to see life. Okay. So then I get in line and I place my order and I get my food. I pay for my food, and I decided to sit by the window so that I could people watch. And as I sat there in the window, and it's the kind of seating where it's a long table, so you're facing the window and facing out, not just the window to the side. And I'm sitting there and I'm people watching. And as I sat there, pregnant woman after pregnant woman after pregnant woman after pregnant woman after pregnant woman began to walk by and walk by. Because I said, I need to see life. I understand the truth of this. That consciousness is everywhere and every possibility exists, and spirit always multiplies. And it would not have been consciousness in truth if I had just seen the one, because consciousness always multiplies. It expresses in multiples. And so, of course, that time, that hour that I sat there at lunch, I began to see life, 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 new life, new life, new life, new life. Spirit is everywhere at all times. It is omnipresence. It is the eternal omni. Every attribute of spirit is everywhere at all times. Every possibility is present and potential at all times. But the multiplicity is always at rest. As the miracle worker, you call forth your desired possibility, and it manifests at the speed of light. What appears to be instant from the human perception. And because spirit always multiplies, you will always have plenty and enough to spare. Anything else ain't spirit. This is why a lot of the wonderful things that humans have demonstrated and manifested are not actually of spirit, right? Or from spirit in truth. Why? Because, for instance, we've manifested the ability to travel, quickly through planes and cars, but then we're polluting the planet and we might destroy ourselves in the process. You see what I'm saying? And this is how we know that these ideas are coming from the level of consciousness, right? Where humans are creating from the level of physicality. And so then it comes with all of these unwanted things. When it's coming from spirit consciousness, there is always multiples. There's plenty and enough to spare, and enough to spare, and enough to spare. And so for this truth, I am so very grateful. And to this truth, I say amen, ashe, and so it is.